Dear all, greetings of the day. I'm Tanvi Shinde. I hope I'm audible clearly. I'm the Senior Associate at SPJMR. It's my great pleasure to extend a warm welcome to all of you for the research presentation series hosted by the Center for Family Business and Entrepreneurship at SPJMR. SPJMR, established in 1981, is top-ranked management institute recognized by the Financial Times global rankings as India's #1 business school, among the top 5 by Business Today. The Center of Family Business and Entrepreneurship empowers leaders with the skills, network, and global perspective for sustainable growth while upholding family values. Its various programs support the next generation leaders, women from business families, aspiring entrepreneurs, and fresh graduates in developing an entrepreneurial mindset. As a part of our commitment to advancing research, SPJMR's CFBE has been proudly hosting the research presentation series. In this session, we are honored to host Professor Natalia Vershenina, Professor of Entrepreneurship and Deputy Director of Research at Audencia Business School, France. Professor Natalia is also an associate researcher at IAS Paris Sorbonne and holds an editorial roles as joint editor-in-chief of Gender, Work and Organization, associate editor for Journal of Business Research, International Journal of Entrepreneurial Behavior and Research. She'll be presenting the topic Reimagining Family Firm Narratives, the Role of Iconology in Unveiling the Layers of History through Visual Imagery and Artefacts. We look forward for your participation in this engaging discussion. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you so much for your introduction. So I need to maybe send a request now to share my screen. I hope that Tulsi or
Ma'am,
Pretty...
I have allowed you. Just try if you can share the screen.
Okay, I am going to try that. So I should be able to share my screen now with you. And we're going here.
Yeah.
And I hope it works. And I wonder if I need to do it this way, that you can see everything.
That's better.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to drop the beautiful faces here. And I'm going to start. I'm really excited, and thank you so much, Tulsi and everyone, for inviting me to present this particular project to you. This project is not just me on its own. It's actually a collaboration with Dr. Ian Smith, who used to... I examined his PhD a while back during COVID, and we reconnected and started working on this exciting project together. So the project is focusing on the role of iconology in understanding how history is built in family firms, and particularly in this specific presentation, I want to talk about kind of where we are. This paper is work in progress. However, we do have a kind of a final manuscript that I'm going to try and kind of convey to you in the next 45 minutes or so, and I will leave some time for questions. I think one of the key objectives of this particular paper and this project is to understand how can art, visual imagery and artifacts that are held as important, particularly to families in business, serve as tools to unlock and understand the importance of historical narrative for family and non-family members in the business. And in fact, the issue of the image of the family firm has received some attention already in the literature over the past decade. But specifically, the focus was on family branding and promotion of family firms. This study is a little bit different. Instead, it focuses on understudied area of internal use of imagery, specifically artistic imagery that conveys meaning primarily intended for those individuals that are internal to the firm. And this, therefore, is a very different focus, and it enables us to develop an understanding of the role of the visual imagery and visual artifacts in the business that are crucial in building and supplementing complex narratives that define organizations, that create organizational identities. In fact, it's built around the concept of iconology, or kind of the field of iconology, and it's connected to art history and provides us, in fact, some valuable insights for analyzing symbolic meanings that are embedded in the visual elements. Iconology refers to the study and interpretation of symbols, icons, visual imagery within cultural, historic, and social contexts. By studying iconology in family firms and family business context, we can get much deeper insights on how these firms, in fact, construct and maintain their unique identities and values over time. And the images are not mere reflections of reality, but they're in fact laden with symbolic meanings that can be decoded, understood, that can be curated, changed, but at the same time, they can sustain the thread of the information, historical information, symbolic information passed on from one generation to the other. It was interesting that Tulsi mentioned that the topic is a little bit different from the typical succession, but it does have very strong connection to understanding what, in fact, in terms of hidden values that gets transferred and how these particular values are imprinted in icons, in imagery that gets passed on or continues to be part of the family business. So historically, iconology, in fact, as you might understand, is connected to religious imagery, and particularly the range and kind of insistence of the types of images that convey specific religious meanings. And family firms, in parallel, also rely on rich tapestry of different visual symbols. You might imagine yourself in the, in the office of the founder, or in the office of the successor, with portraits of founders being emblematic artifacts that convey not only company history but also heritage and ethos. Because we produce stories of these individuals, and we produce stories of these individuals that were once important to the business, and we use them to convey the culture and the ethos of the firm to those that come after them. These are the types of images, in fact, that represent the enduring integral part of the family firm narrative and the history. And indeed, they could both represent the history as the past, but also could be made very important in the present. And that is the reason why they become really important aspects or artifacts that act as time capsules and add layers of explanation of what is going on in the family firm and why certain things become important.
Natalia, are you changing your
No,
slide?
not yet, not
All
yet,
right,
not
all right.
yet,
Sorry,
not
sorry.
yet.
Yeah.
But I just want for you to understand the rationale for why we are
Absolutely,
studying this, and then I'll move on. So don't worry about it.
No, absolutely.
I also want to say that icons in general are not just decorative. So they serve as powerful tools for internal communication, but they also could be used, to reveal how they can foster a sense of belonging to the organization, how they can kind of pass on this sense of continuity in the business, and how they can also project the shared purpose for the actors within the organization. So iconology as a kind of as a theoretical frame is something that hasn't been used for in the literature on family firms, and in this particular case we rely on the profound work on iconology developed by Panofsky, but we develop it further to make sense of it in the context of the family business. So we argue in the paper that although it's been kind of derived from the Greek word image and combined with the word for reason or thought, so an image that is imbued with certain symbolic value. Indeed, our concern in the paper is on uncovering the symbolic and allegorical meanings in the works of art, but not works of art in the context of family firm, but works of art that are taking a center stage in family firms in conveying what this family firm is all about. Panofsky, in particular, kind of progressed the understanding of iconology by kind of explaining that using the visual objects is not simply for the sake of gaining more information about the visuals themselves, but actually using visuals as evidence for wider cultural analysis of the time, of what was going on, of historical context, helps us to make sense of where the firm is coming from and where it is going and what is the direction of travel. So we use within this work also kind of ideas from Heidegger, who argues that visual imagery, art, and such physical artifacts are both representative of the way things are in a particular culture exist, but also how they influence shared understandings of different actors, particularly in the community. When we talk about family business literature, this is not new. We're not presenting something completely novel, but we're giving maybe kind of shining a light on a specific phenomena that is kind of being developed by family business scholars around symbols or artifacts that hold symbolic value. We know that there is a lot of work that's going on right now around legacy, and legacy can take material and immaterial forms. We also know that within the material forms, we could have sacred objects, as well as sacred images, as well as sacred stories and other types of kind of narratives or visual representations that are resurfacing as evidence for us to make sense and also make claims and theoretical development around how family firms transfer and kind of transcend values across different generations. We have seen several papers already written around symbolic power of visual objects. We also know that in organization studies research, we see that visuals are part of kind of explaining or exhibiting, enacting, manifesting organizational identity. Not only they are part of the organizational identity, they also inform different actors on what this organizational identity is. However, these are subject to interpretation, and the meaning of the identity may change over time, because dependent on when different actors try and start to interpret the images and from what contextual base, they may see or add bits to the story or take away bits from the story that creates a story of the organization in the present. We also see that visual artifacts in family firms function as forms of emotional cultural capital. In fact, there are studies that claim that visual artifacts also give firm resilience and continuity. In our own study with Roy Sotheby, Gideon Markman, Wilson Ge, and Matthew Cadbury, when we looked at the organization called Cadbury in the UK, we could see how artifacts that are treated as sacred objects could be imbued with specific meaning that would reinforce family legacy through the process of sacralization. And also, particularly, and this is the work of Luca Manelli, who has presented to you guys previously, around the moments of the firm transition from one generation to the other, transition from one crisis to the other. The emotional function of visual artifacts also aligns with the concept that we bring from so specifically looking at narrative lamination, how narratives are created. Original work of Bourdieu talks about the fact that narratives don't exist in the vacuum. They are produced, reproduced, reframed by different actors in organizations. This wasn't the work that was specific to family business, but we draw on the concept of lamination of narratives, where old narratives get replaced or get laminated on top by other narratives that kind of supersede or overcome certain aspects of the narrative of the past, therefore enabling us to progress and move together to the next generation. So one of the things that we don't see a lot in the literature, and I think this is quite important, and this is what we try to reveal in the paper, is that we don't have a lot of kind of a deep understanding of how visual artifacts, how they can function as rhetorical devices. So devices in which we could kind of mold and change the way we perceive who we are. And amend, curate certain aspects of things we don't want to see, we don't want to take with us to the next generation or to the next phase of the firm. Therefore, this particular area is a space in which we are trying to kind of to start a conversation or to continue a conversation, particularly in the context of firms that have been developing long-term narratives and legacy. So our main question for this study is, how do visual artifacts serve as rhetorical tools for shaping and preserving organizational identity across generations, and how do their meanings evolve over time in response to changing family and business dynamics? Quite a big topic, quite a big question, but let me tell you a story where we got to. So our focus is on an organization called Hilltop. So it's a big catering firm, cleaning firm, food service firm, vending firm. That is Hilltop Group in Ireland. The name of the family is McKenna family, very famous family, and I will tell you a little bit more about them as we move kind of forward. It's not a super multi-generational firm, but we do have 2 generations in this firm, and I will explain to you why this particular case is important, because not only we were able to identify certain visual artifacts that are present in their day-to-day activity and that are used as rhetorical devices for defining and redefining organizational identity. It's also a firm that has multiple individuals from the family that are part of the business, and all of them are engaged in this curation process. So we're using interpretative kind of case study approach. It is very typical of the type of the research that we see in family business in particular. And in fact, in our case, we argue that this is a purposive case choice. Why? Because this organization had to be a family firm, both in terms of the different involvement of the individuals, but also the essence of the firm, despite the size in terms of the number of employees. It's a rare and unique case because in this case, they do adopt this iconographic imagery as part of their day-to-day life. And you may say to me that there are a lot of firms that do this, but very few of them have got a story that goes with all of this. And I will explain this a little bit further as we move to the kind of findings and our data. We also apply criteria of cases being able to provide access to suitable depth and insight of the data from the original paper by Alfredo Di Massis and Josip Kotler, published in 2014, on use of cases in family firms. And of course, there is kind of on top of this very heavy association with the key persons in the firm, within the firm narrative history. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about what exactly did we do. So using Panofsky's kind of 3 layers of interpretation. So we identified the object of interpretation, adopting our interpretative case narrative. We focused on firstly identifying primary or natural subject matter. So with facts, with specific expressional kind of constituting the world of artistic motives in the imagery. And this produced a set of pre-iconographical descriptions, which enabled us to already position certain aspects as more important in family narrative and those that are less important. Some particular kind of critical points in the development of the firm were depicted in the imagery. A second stage of the interpretation involved this kind of understanding the different images and stories associated with it, as well as allegories associated with those stories. We wanted to engage indeed in this iconographical analysis in the narrower sense of the word, indeed interpreting the imagery within and placing it within the context of the firm and its historical development. And we also wanted to reveal as a third element the symbolical values and the intrinsic meanings of the content. And this enabled us to therefore to synthesize some of these aspects in the firm. You might ask me, what particular images are you talking about? What is it that we are looking at here? I will come back to, let me just do this a little bit. I want to start maybe with this, and then I'll go back to my slides. So this is just selection of images. You might have questions about what are these images for? Where do they come from? Actually, you see on one of the images, it is part of the staircase. In fact, the firm depicted all critical elements of its history and importance in the staircase that all employees are using on a daily basis. You may see some important aspects here, but I will talk about them in detail in the analysis. You may see a picture of Tony Blair here at the bottom as part of the peace talks. We also see the very symbolic aspect of the firm was catering for the peace talks. And the agreement was reached. You see the images of the police, being part of this, and they were given cups of tea and coffee during that period. This is the, sort of Paul McKenna himself. We see examples on the staircase, and I'm not including all of the imagery here, but just some examples, how certain organizations are becoming important clients and what that means to the business, particularly for the growth, but also where they are. And on the top here in Bombardier Aerospace, you see the crane in the port. It's a symbol of Belfast. And I think it's very important to note that this particular imagery has been told and retold. These particular images are used by the organization for all new recruits to understand where the business is coming from, who are the key people, what are the key processes, what are the historical aspects of this. Okay, so I'm going back to visualization of the logic of the iconographic analysis. Here we see the lamination in action, how certain aspects of the story and the image are intersected to produce not only the primary purpose, the elements of the values that are imbued in this organization. Sorry, I hope you can't hear the music outside. We have a band practicing outside during lunch. The second layer is more conventional, sort of key wisdoms and connecting stories with interpretations. And finally, third level, kind of visualizing how the meaning is derived from this, that retains and sustains certain aspects of the narrative and how potentially negotiations can happen, yet we are laminating certain aspects of that narrative. So in iconographic analysis, this is just for your reference. So we have split the analysis into 3 segments. And each image that we have, and we have 24 big images that we've selected as part of the narrative in the paper to showcase key events, particularly in the beginning, good food on Good Friday, the agreement, feeding the peace talks, feeding the next generation, and then kind of looking at different aspects of the clients. So how did we do this? Family is centered to business identity. We know that the imagery, in fact, is a narrative tool, and there is spatial significance and placement of imagery in the whole that helps us to make sense of this pre-iconographic description of the cases. So, for instance, you may have some quotes from the organizational members that interpret those images for us. You would definitely get a sense of history. You get the feeling that it's family-oriented and family-run, and John himself is at the forefront of that. You can see the journey that we've had and also the different avenues that we've had to take to get to the size that we are at the minute. I think if I was to sum up in one word, by the time you get to the end, I hope it will be togetherness. And the spatial significance is through stairwell images serve as a timeline guiding them through the company's history. Indeed, this helps us to see that the placement of the images in the transitional space where employees and possibly visitors frequently pass ensures that the company narrative is consistently reinforced, because everybody asks the question, what is it? What does that mean? Where does this come from? Or, you know, you go past something and there is a story connected to this. It helps to reinforce the family identity, family history amongst all of the individuals. In terms of the second stage of the analysis, on iconographic analysis, and this is just to remind you, we need to look at the symbolism of these different images. On the Good Friday Agreement, for us, you know, we're serving teas and coffees and keeping all of those key people who were involved in those decisions at the time. We were there. My dad was in the room when the Good Friday Agreement was signed. He was friends with Bertie Ahern and Tony Blair back then because they saw our involvement. The teas and coffee stops, the food stops, that's the fuel for life. Visual transmission of trust and representation of the ethos is also part of this symbolic aspect. Being able to instill the values in the core, these are important to us as a family. The day that we lose the ethos is the day we shouldn't be here. And emotional resonance of the imagery. Every time I pass them, paintings, it might not even register with me, but knowing that here is a constant reminder. I think reflecting on what it actually means, legacy, hard work, where we have come from, and it signals where we're going to. And finally, the iconological interpretation. We have 4 examples with 4 quotes here. The role of memory in shaping personal and corporate identity. For example, here, it's all memories you know. I've grown up in Hilltop. I always tell them, the new employees, my story, and if it wasn't for Hilltop, God knows where I would be. The challenge of maintaining identity amidst growth. The bigger we get, the closer one have to be to the history of the firm, to understanding why, where do they belong, where do they work, what does that mean to them and to the community. I hope my kids could come in 10, 15 years time and see us build 2 or 3 more floors of the imagery. Yeah, so building extra layers of the history and sort of looking at this power dynamics, the hierarchical representation and cultural and regional influence of imagery. The imagery used within Hilltop is deeply intertwined with the cultural and regional context in which the business operates. This relationship can be seen in how local traditions, historical events, and regional symbols are incorporated into the visual representations throughout the company. So these elements help to root the business within its community and provide, you know, employees, clients, and visitors with a sense of shared history and identity. So lots of points of discussion here that are being brought up by these amazing images and 3-layered interpretation. One is, you know, an important point is that in fact, icons, imagery in family firms reinforce identity culture and reproduce the narrative and encourage this reproduction of the narrative of the family identity, of the family history, and where it comes from and where it's going. In fact, within the identity formation, we can see that the imagery within Hilltop serves as a central element in conveying how, you know, what is this firm, what does it stand for? Specifically emphasizing where they came from and this idea of hard work. In fact, we could also see how it spills over into the organizational culture that they would like to have, which is also built on history and the legacy of previous generation. Iconology kind of as a way in which to think about how families create legacy, how they transfer values from one generation to the other, but also how they transfer value of the family business to non-family members. We can see how iconology could act as a reflective tool, therefore. In fact, Panofsky's method helps us to kind of raise the awareness about this reflective process and understanding organizational artifacts. We maybe forget at times that family and non-family members of the family firm are faced with organizational artifacts, whether they're images, whether they're more kind of imbued sacred objects or particular practices that are happening in organizations on a daily basis, what sense do they make of it? How do they make sense of it? In fact, from our interpretation, and we're kind of developing this work further, it's important to see that the meaning has layers, and these layers are time kind of operated. So they start in the past, and then these different layers of meaning get laminated one on top of the other and are reproduced. And every person who tells a story brings in bits of the past, but also curates the story alongside, this process. It also helps us to see how cultural artifacts, in fact, have dynamic nature. You cannot protect the image and its interpretation in its original form. This is always changing because of the transition in generation, because of the different clients and different importance that we place on these objects at different times. In fact, we could see how the narratives evolve over time, and there are challenges connected to this. How do you retain the original meaning that was kind of imbued in the instance of creating this image? In fact, we also see that sometimes this is, could be seen as a mnemonic device, where images serve as a mnemonic device and showcasing and enabling certain emotional and symbolic value to emerge and to be part of the discursive daily practice. I want to finish on some of the ideas here that I think are quite important and maybe leave some space for a very good discussion around this topic. So firstly, I want to say that we're not finished. Of course, the project is ongoing. We're still doing additional analysis. We have changed the way we present our data. We're not just presenting it in 3 different elements. We're looking at the key themes connected to specific images. We write a separate story in the paper around the staircase and the importance of the space within the family firm, which enables this rhetorical kind of questioning and curation of family history, and how some firms create these spaces on purpose and some firms try to avoid to have these spaces because they feel that they want to protect the original meaning and they want to keep the meaning alive. But it's a very difficult process because everybody is involved in this process, and this is what we recognized in our study, that whether you are family or non-family member, whether you are representative of the first or second generation, whether you are the next gen that is working in the business, all of you have the chance and the power to influence where the family narrative is going to go. However, it's important to refine and discuss and agree on what are the key aspects that you want to keep as sacred, because these are the things that really connect the past with the present and the present with the future. It's important to also, and this is something that we're going to develop a bit more in the paper around this, to recognize the dynamic interplay between the visual representation and organizational change. As we bring new images that are becoming very important, we are moving with the history of the firm. And it's very important to remember that important moments that are happening in the present may kind of create opportunities in the future, but may also act as kind of more negative kind of barriers or hold firms back in developing further, kind of going forward. There is also a possibility to kind of offered by the method, particularly related to Panofsky's ideas and the layers and kind of the types of interpretation, to interpretive analysis, to deconstruct, interpret, and reconstruct what is it that is imbued in terms of the meaning to those images and artifacts. Iconology is highly subjective, you might say, and I hope we can have a discussion around this, because in fact it challenges us as researchers, because we also as researchers come with our own preconceived ideas of what meanings might be emerging from the imagery. It is really important to stay authentic to the voices of your participants in this case, kind of really triangulating between different individuals and seeking truth that is more connected to at to firm level, and disconnecting your judgments is very important in this case. Although, because we as theorists or as scholars, we are trying to make sense of the case situation through specific lens of theory, we are also imposing certain ways in which we will then interpret the data. So we must be very careful with this, and I think this is going to be one of our highest challenges in publishing this work, convincing our reviewers that what we are saying about the firm and how dynamic the curation of the kind of narrative of the firm is happening is not what we are seeing, it's actually what's happening on the ground. I also want to say that it may or may not hold explanatory power in different contexts and in different geographies. So in some places, visual imagery and iconology may be more culturally pertinent and understood, whereas in some places this may not play a significant role. And we see this particularly, kind of if we've recently had a visit from one of the scholars that works on consulting firms, and the kind of offices layout and the fact that they are completely manicured and kind of made not personalized, very modern. And so modern offices do not particularly focus on icons, and they have almost no history to show through those icons, yet they are able to create a story. How can you create a story of the firm in the absence of icons and imagery? And I think that future studies, in fact, could help us to not only see the positives, and I know that this talk might come across as more positively oriented towards the use of visual artifacts and gives them a lot of credit in building the historical narrative of the firm. But maybe there is potential downside to this. And, they might be interpreted, particularly by the next generation, as things that hold us back. But we want more studies on this. I hope this particular talk was interesting to you. I have managed to fit my talk within the 45 minutes. I know I have music in the background. I hope it's not distracting you from the topic of the paper. And I look forward to your questions and maybe some suggestions on where we could go next or how can we improve this work.
Great, Natalia. Thank you so much for that lovely presentation. And we will take some questions now, but before they start, could I just ask you a question, Natalia?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. This is just so interesting, Natalia, just so interesting. Because to me, when you said visual artifacts, I had not seen your PPT at all because, as I told you yesterday, I was just completely tired. But I am just trying to relate it to Alfredo Di Masi's work and Emanuela's work on the entrepreneurial galaxy. And if you look at some of those constituents of the galaxy, the visual artifact probably finds more place in some of those elements of the galaxy, like say a museum, or in the Indian case, possibly even a family temple. Family businesses have actually built temples.
Absolutely, but I think this is one of the kind of comments that I've made at the end. It might be more relevant or less relevant in specific contexts. So
Yeah.
if we for now, I can give you maybe some Western perspective, and Western perspective would be, and particularly as we've just finished the kind of the case with this case, we have the staircase. It's not usual to have a staircase with images, but what is more usual is to have portraits, to have your first pound, kind of the first pound on the mantelpiece, a sacred ring that somebody passed on to you because you belong to a particular mafia group, that gives you power. So it's these sacred objects that are being used as a way to justify certain behavior in the past, but also retell the story and also funnel the story of the firm in a particular direction. So I think it's interesting within the galaxy perspective, and I understand where you're coming from, because Alfredo, he sent us his book, we've seen his images, and I think it's really important to recognize that it also probably is connected to the life cycle of where the firm is in terms of generations, because the further you are away from the founding generation, the more likely you are to have more artifacts that have been accumulated, whether visual, whether more symbolic, whether kind of material, non-material. Yeah, and the story therefore becomes really complex, and it becomes a challenge to funnel down to the key values that you still want to instill in the firm for family members that are working in the firm, for family members that are not working in the firm anymore, and all the non-family members that are working in the firm and are connected to the firm, so they can make sense of what is it that we're trying to do here and how we're trying to do it that is respecting the past.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one kind of observation. The other observation was, again, I think you put it very well. The temporal aspect of this iconology is going to be very, very critical. And I'm just wondering that if you have these kind of visual artifacts, which are providing a certain narrative about what that family business is, or who that the family is, and you have a next generation which does not live up to that narrative, how is that going to impact the narrative itself and the relevance of the visual artifacts?
But I think this is a very pertinent question, and this is what I was saying kind of at the very end, the negative side of it. Because in fact, it's very difficult when you have been telling a very strong story about these incredible people who you make heroes, you make into heroes as part of this story, because they've done things that were outside of their own control in most cases. This is our human nature. We try to create heroes. Yeah. And when you have these heroes as part of the story, so what happens with the next gen is they learn about them, and then the idea is that your firm is permissive of mistakes, isn't it? We don't record mistakes on the wall. We wouldn't have any non-heroic aspects on the wall as part of the storytelling. And this is why it's very interesting.
Yeah.
Because it reveals to us that we want to believe in a better future for the firm, and we want to make sure that we only retain, and that's why we curate, we only retain the best stories, the stories of resilience, the stories of overcoming trouble or difficulties, and the wins.
So by definition, history is the account of the winner, of the victor.
Exactly. Because the history is in the mouth of the person that's telling the story to the next generation.
Yes. I'll let someone else ask some questions, and then I'll come back again, Natalia, if you have the time. Any other questions, please? I thought.
Yeah.
Subhendu?
Yeah.
Please go.
Good evening. Sorry, in India. Good evening. It's a wonderful piece of work that I could see. And Madam had just asked me the question which she mentioned about this passing on the narratives and how these narratives should be passed on by the next generation or something. But I have one specific question for you, ma'am. It's how you have selected these icons, whether there was any idea behind selecting, because you talked about visual imageries, and so is there any idea behind selecting these icons for interpretation? Or
in our case, we included all the images that were on the staircase, because we wanted to include all of the images that were made as important, because they were basically placed on the walls because they were becoming important for the owner. So it's the family that decides what's important to them, and then we interpret what they place on the wall as icons, and the stories that come, because they're being explained by the various individuals and retold by various individuals through our data collection. So, kind of the idea would be not to be selective, but to include everything and then make sense of it. But what we find, and this is kind of one of the revelations that is yet to be framed in a way that's not going to upset the family, is that we only see the best stories, the best events, most critical events as the ones that where they've achieved something important. But negative events we never put on the wall.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dana has a question. Dana, do you want to read it out? Do you want me to read it out? Do you see the next generation as entrepreneurial, and do you think the imagery has helped develop an entrepreneurial mindset? It's Dana Gasimpur.
Thank you so much. Very good question. Nice to see you, Dana. I know that we follow each other on LinkedIn. It's wonderful to connect here. It depends on the firm. You know, it's not something that I can respond to. In this specific business, yes, there are several next generation members, and they believe in the story. When they tell this story, they believe in the story, and they do reproduce the same narrative. What we also see in this specific case is that these particular individuals have gone through a lot of acquisitions of clients. So it's a relatively large firm, lots of projects, lots of clients, and indeed everyone that works in the business has to be entrepreneurial. But it comes to the nature of the sector in which you operate. And I think there are major expectations on all next gens to be more innovative than the generation before, because they would want to make a stamp on the business, their own stamp, and they will want to leave their own legacy. I think what happens kind of later on is, you know, we might discover there is a misalignment between the family values, original values, and where the next generation is taking us. And that creates some kind of opportunity for rewriting the family story. And maybe for creating new images that will document the new direction for the firm.
Great. Kalpana has a question. Can icons become logos for the family business?
I think logos can become logos for the family business, but icons can become very important aspects that are really imbued with value. However, there is a separate literature on branding. Indeed, in this literature, kind of we see, and I know we have a school, I think, Zeppelin University, for example, they have a group of scholars that are working on branding and family firms, and they will tell you possibly more around how brands from family businesses become iconic. In fact, what we find is that a lot of the family firm brands use the word family as part of the branding. But that's a different theme altogether. But I think it's a very interesting theme, and it's worth developing further, because I don't think anything was written on this, particularly in the Indian context.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. No, I'll just come in quickly with just one more question, Natalia. And this is just top of the, top of my head. I'm just thinking that typically when we look at family businesses, we are looking at word of mouth as trying to propagate a certain kind of narrative. And probably the visual artifacts are even more important. And maybe family businesses need to be taught how to institutionalize this iconography, because it's not that it doesn't exist, but probably you may just want to, in your research, also look at what is the strength of the visual artifacts vis-a-vis simply word of mouth. I don't know, because see, when you're looking at a certain narrative, you see, in at least whatever my experience of Indian family businesses is, how do values permeate? So they've heard the same thing being repeated over and over and over again. Now, if you have some visual artifacts which could actually supplement that, or kind of help in providing this visual evidence, I suppose the kind of imprint is going to be far greater, which you spoke about. Absolutely.
I think we wrote quite a lot about this in our Cadbury paper. So,
okay.
you know, particularly around, you know, what makes something sacred? How do you make a behavior sacred? And this comes from institutional theory, and the theorist Mary Douglas. So I do recommend everyone to look at Mary Douglas, and she wrote this incredible piece which has not been used too much in the literature, but it's incredible. It's on how institutions think. And it develops and kind of talks about the process of selecting individuals that can pass on certain information, but then also document it in processes and procedures. Kind of as we professionalize, certain aspects that you would like to see need to be professionalized. Yeah. What I also wanted to say, sort of kind of going back to the original question around word of mouth versus the imagery. Word of mouth depends on our memory.
Yeah.
And when we lose our memory and when we are operating in the kind of in times where there is a lot of information being brought to your head, you may not remember certain aspects. Whereas when you have an image on the wall, you're constantly faced with re-imprinting practice of certain aspects, and stories come back to life in your brain.
Yeah.
So I think it's not just a rhetorical device, and you've just given me something else to write about. It's the memory device.
Yeah. That's what I was coming to.
Thank you.
Yeah. So just one more question from me. It's just a clarificatory question, Natalia. What are these icons that? What are these? Are these pictures? Are these paintings? Because I thought they looked more like someone has painted something.
Yes, it's exactly that. It is basically recording every time something important happens, and the family founders or the managers are feeling that this is an important aspect in the history of the firm. It gets placed on the wall.
No, so they paint something on canvas.
They paint something on the staircase, and the staircase gets filled up with all of these images. And then
almost like a tattoo you get done on your body every time.
Absolutely. It's exactly like that. And it's not what I originally thought was going to be, because I assumed there was going to be really old paintings of something. It's not that at all. It's very modern. It's very specific. And this is why this case is really unique, because we haven't seen many businesses like this that are able to document in art and in symbols, in icons, very specific aspects of their development.
Right. Paras Gupta has a question. What perspective should a family business focus and collect over time to project their strong image? Hi, Paras, can you just switch on your video if it's possible? Introduce yourself.
Hello.
Hi, Paras.
Hello, ma'am.
I'm just trying to understand the question.
Yeah, ma'am. Actually, I'm also part of my family business. I have just joined 6 months back after my MBA. So it was great attending your presentation. So I wanted to know that what perspectives or identities or things family businesses collect and focus over time that
I think the
you
most
could pass on to
important,
the other
yeah,
generation. Yeah.
one of the key aspects is that we need to have a discussion, across different members on what is important for the business to retain. And I think this is something that we come back now and again with every family business. Next gens generally struggle because they don't know, or they don't have this kind of implicit ideas. Maybe they have some ideas of what the meaning of this business is, what were the most important milestones in the development of the firm. These stories get repeated at the dinner table. It's not something that is not being reproduced, but how do you take this knowledge and then pass it on to other people? Because you in the family business is not just 3 people. You're growing, you're recruiting those that are going to work for you, and for them, the discussion at the dinner table doesn't take place. So there might be other ways. You need to look for other ways in which not only to establish clarity about what is it that you want to be in terms of value and the image, but also how do you cascade that to everybody? How do you achieve the buy-in? Is it done through conversation? Is it done through enabling them to understand historical importance of the firm? I'll give you an example. So one of the firms I've been working with is a funeral services firm. So this is not this case. Funeral services firm that started as a carpentry business, And then during the First World War, they had to create a coffin for one of the children that died because of the typhoid, and there was no one that could make those things. And so they realized there is a niche, particularly during the war period, that you were able to do it. And actually what they did is they documented their history and the key events on the wall too, but not in the way of imagery, but images like photographs and text. So I've
Okay,
seen
okay.
Right? Of the child?
text. No, not just, I mean, first stories. The business comes from because there was a need to create a coffin, to build a coffin. And then
Okay.
what happens afterwards? There were a lot of people, they acted as a hospital, but they also needed to deal with people that were dying. So they basically developed funeral services. This firm is now in 6th generation. It's also celebrating first women in business running the business. There was no man to take over. Okay, so this is very interesting.
Okay.
And what you see is these elements of the story building the rationale for where they are, why they exist the way they exist, and what that means to everybody else around them. And it's very interesting case because the woman now has 2 daughters that she brought into the business. And so it's becoming a business which is normally in a very masculinized industry, a business that's run by women.
Okay. That's great, man. Thank you.
Lovely, Paris. Thank you. Any other questions? I think we're done. It's very rich discussion, Natalia.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
One
I
last
enjoyed it.
question, Natalia, just
Okay.
one small one. Did you find out from these guys, when did they actually start creating these icons?
So it started on the first day when the first, I showed you this image. I think it's here. It's John. Where is it? Yeah, it's here. Just let me see if I can share my screen again.
Where he's serving the tea? Is that?
Yeah, serving the tea. So it's
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
tea, with the kettle, with the
No,
teapot.
but okay. So did they start it then itself, or was it done post facto?
No, so they've started, and then the image needed to be there because they wanted to say that, even John, John is serving tea. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalia. We'll have someone just saying thank you on behalf of the center. Preeti, is that you going to be speaking? Hello.
Yeah, ma'am, I'm here. I'm here. So, on behalf of all the present here, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Natalia for her insightful presentation on the reimagining of family farm narratives. Thank you, ma'am. It was really very informative and a completely new concept which we all came to know about. Of course, the concepts of iconology and artifacts provided by you were it just gave us a deeper understanding about how the imagery can reflect the organizational and its culture. Of course, we also learned how the audience interprets this imagery, this visual artifacts, and how strongly it is used to highlight the representation and the integral part of the organizational culture. So thank you so much, ma'am, for your presentation. Of course, we would also like to thank Tulsi ma'am. Thank you for adding a few points and giving your perspective towards the visual imaginary, ma'am. It was really nice. And
Natalia, on a slightly different note, today morning I was telling the team that we have to fill up the walls with everything that we have been doing. So I was just texting my team that you need to listen into this particular session.
True, ma'am. And actually, it was very, very informative. And I don't think so anyone, understood this part of imagery and artifacts which Natalia ma'am has put forward. So, thank you to all the ma'am, Tulsi ma'am, Natalia ma'am, of course, the research presenters,
Thank
the
you so
SPGM
much.
faculty, the
Thank
research
you.
scholars, and everyone else who
Tulsi, you
attended.
knew. You knew.
Attended the presentation. And of course, you can, for all this more of such research presentation series, you can follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook to keep for this new announcements. Thank you, ma'am. Good evening to all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalia.
you.
See you soon.
Thank you, and bye-bye. Bye-bye to
Bye.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Enjoy
Bye,
your
ma'am.
evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.